It was one evening. A servant stood beneath the Rashomon gate, waiting for the rain to stop. Under the wide gate, there was no one else. Only a single cricket perched on one of the great wooden pillars, its red lacquer peeling away in places. Since the Rashomon stood at the southern end of Suzaku Avenue, one might expect to see 2 or 3 others. Perhaps a woman with a bamboo hat or a man in a black cap, also taking shelter from the rain. But apart from this servant, there was no one. Why was that? Because over the past 2 or 3 years, Kyoto had been struck by a series of disasters: earthquakes, whirlwinds, fires, and famine. The capital had fallen into ruin beyond measure. Old records tell of people smashing Buddhist statues and altar fittings, then selling the fragments as firewood. Wood still flecked with red lacquer or gold leaf. If that was the state of the city, no one could be expected to care about repairing the Rashomon. The abandoned gate soon became home to foxes and thieves. And in the end, it even became the custom to bring unclaimed corpses here and leave them beneath the gate. When night fell, people avoided the area, fearing the ghosts and the stench of death that lingered there. Instead, crows began to gather from somewhere unseen. In the daytime, they circled above the gate, crying harshly as they wheeled around its high-tiled roof. Especially when the evening sky burned red at sunset, they appeared against the glow like black sesame scattered across a crimson field. They came, of course, to peck at the flesh of the dead lying above the gate. Tonight, however, perhaps because the hour was late, not a single crow could be seen. Only on the crumbling stone steps, overgrown with long grass in the cracks, white patches of crow droppings clung here and there. The servant sat on the top of the 7 stone steps, his worn indigo robe damp with rain. He idly rubbed the large pimple on his right cheek, gazing blankly at the falling rain. The author has written, "The servant was waiting for the rain to stop." But in truth, even if the rain were to end, he had nowhere to go. Ordinarily, of course, he would have returned to his master's house. But 4 or 5 days ago, he had been dismissed. As mentioned before, Kyoto had fallen into deep decline. The servant's dismissal was merely a small ripple of that larger decay. So rather than saying, "The servant was waiting for the rain to stop," it would be more accurate to say, "The servant, trapped by the rain, was lost, with nowhere to turn." The gloomy weather only deepened his melancholy. The rain had begun to fall in the late afternoon, and there was no sign it would stop. So the servant sat there, trying somehow to think of a way to survive tomorrow. Trying, in other words, to make sense of the impossible. He let his thoughts wander endlessly, listening without listening to the sound of rain falling on Suzaku Avenue. The rain wrapped the Rashomon in sound, gathering in waves that rushed from far away. The evening darkness sank lower, and when he looked up, he could see the gate's roof pressing against heavy, dim clouds. If one must find a way to live, There is no time to choose among means. If he hesitated, he would starve, under the city walls, or by the roadside, and his body would be thrown, like a dog's, beneath this very gate. But if he did not hesitate, if he cast away all scruples, then what? His thoughts circled back, again and again, to the same grim conclusion. To live, he must abandon choice itself. And yet, even as he admitted this to himself, he lacked the courage to take the final step, to say aloud, "There is nothing left but to steal." The servant sneezed loudly, then rose slowly to his feet. The Kyoto evening had turned cold, cold enough to make one long for a fire. The wind passed freely between the great pillars of the gate, carrying the dusk along with it. The cricket that had perched there earlier was gone, leaving only the sound of the endless rain. The servant hunched his shoulders, raising the collar of his indigo robe over his yellow undergarment, and looked slowly around the gate. He was searching for a place, somewhere out of the wind and rain, somewhere unseen by others, somewhere he might rest through the night in peace. Then he saw it, a wide, red lacquered ladder, leading up to the upper chamber of the gate. If there were anyone up there, they could only be the dead. The servant tightened his grip on the sword at his waist, careful not to let it rattle in its scabbard. Then, in his straw sandals, he placed one cautious foot on the first rung of the ladder. Some minutes later, on the middle steps of that wide, red ladder, a man crouched like a cat, holding his breath, peering upward. A faint light flickered above, and it glimmered across his right cheek, the cheek marked by a red, swollen blemish, half hidden in his short beard. He had believed, at first, that only corpses would be found above, but as he climbed, he saw something else, a dim, yellow light, burning somewhere in the upper chamber. The light wavered against the cobwebbed ceiling, casting long, trembling shadows. Who, on a night like this, a night of cold rain and silence, would dare light a fire inside the Rashomon? The servant crept upward, as silent as a lizard. He crawled onto the top rung, pressing his body flat, stretching his neck forward, and, trembling slightly, peered into the darkness within. There, just as rumor had said, lay a heap of corpses, cast aside without care. The fire's glow reached only so far. He could not tell how many there were. Some were naked, some still wore their robes. Men and women alike, though they hardly seemed human anymore. They looked like clay dolls, their mouths half open, their arms outstretched, lying scattered across the floor. The dull firelight touched their shoulders and chests, leaving the hollows between them deep in shadow. They lay there, forever silent, forever still. The servant, overwhelmed by the stench of decay, covered his nose instinctively, but in the next moment, he forgot to do even that. Some stronger feeling, a feeling fierce and wordless, had swept through him. and taken away his very sense of smell. At that moment, the servant's eyes caught sight of movement among the corpses. There, crouched low in the shadows, was a human figure, an old woman. She wore a faded brown robe, her small frame thin and frail, her hair white and wild, her face shriveled like that of an aged monkey. In her right hand, she held a burning piece of pine wood, its flame flickering weakly in the gloom. She leaned over one of the bodies, peering closely into its face. Judging from the long hair, it was likely the corpse of a woman. The servant froze, gripped by fear and curiosity in nearly equal measure. 6 parts fear, 4 parts fascination. He even forgot to breathe. As one ancient chronicler once wrote, the hair upon his head stood on end. Then, the old woman pressed the pine torch between the floorboards to free both hands. She reached toward the corpse, and like a mother monkey grooming its child, she began plucking the dead woman's hair. Strand by strand, each one came away easily, following the pull of her fingers. With every hair she drew from the corpse, the servant's fear began to fade, slowly, steadily, and in its place, a new emotion rose within him, a fierce hatred. No, not hatred for the old woman alone, but a deeper loathing for evil itself, for the ugliness of human desperation. If, at that very moment, someone had asked him again the question he pondered beneath the gate, whether to starve or to steal, he would have chosen starvation. Without hesitation. That was how fiercely his heart now burned with moral fury. Like the little pine torch the old woman had stuck into the floor, the servant did not understand why she was plucking the hair from the dead. He could not tell whether it was right or wrong, but to him, on this rainy night, beneath the cursed roof of the Rashomon, there was no doubt. It was an unforgivable act of evil. He had already forgotten that only moments ago, he himself had considered becoming a thief. Then, suddenly, he gathered strength in both legs, and leapt up from the ladder, gripping the hilt of his sword. He strode boldly toward the old woman. It goes without saying, she was terrified. The old woman saw the servant, and leapt up as if struck by an arrow. "Where do you think you're going?" the servant shouted, blocking her path as she stumbled over the corpses. Desperate to flee, she tried to push past him, but he shoved her back. Among the dead, the two struggled in silence, grappling in the dim, wavering firelight. But the outcome was certain. The servant seized her arm and forced her down to the floor. Her arm was thin and dry, nothing but bone and skin, like the leg of a chicken. "What were you doing?" he demanded. "Speak. If you don't, I'll make you talk." He pushed her away, then drew his sword, the pale steel flashing before her eyes. But she said nothing. Her hands trembled. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, bulged as if they might burst from their sockets. She was silent, stubbornly, fearfully silent. Seeing this, the servant suddenly realized something. Her life and her death were now completely in his hands. That realization cooled his anger. What replaced it was a strange calm, a grim satisfaction, the quiet sense of control one feels after completing a difficult task. He lowered his voice slightly and said, "I am not a policeman, nor an officer of the court. I am merely a traveler, passing beneath this gate. I've no reason to tie you up or punish you. I only want to know, what were you doing here? On this night, beneath this roof?" The old woman's eyes opened even wider, staring straight into his face, sharp and gleaming, like those of a bird of prey. Her lips, cracked and sunken, moved as though chewing invisible words. Her thin throat trembled, and her Adam's apple rose and fell. At last, from that throat came a croaking voice, ragged and uneven. "I was pulling the hair from that corpse, to make a wig." The servant was startled, then disappointed. Her answer was so ordinary, so pitifully human, and as disappointment filled him, his earlier hatred returned, colder now, tinged with contempt. She must have sensed it. Still clutching a handful of hair she had torn from the dead woman's head, the old crone muttered, in a hoarse, toad-like voice, "Yes, perhaps it's an evil thing to pluck the hair from the dead. But these corpses, they are all people who deserve no better. That woman, the one whose hair I took, she once cut snakes into 4-inch pieces, dried them, and sold them as dried fish to the samurai camp. If disease hadn't taken her, she'd still be doing it now. Those warriors ate her fish with delight, never knowing. So tell me, was that not evil? Yet she did it, because she would have starved otherwise. And I do this for the same reason. If I don't, I'll starve too." The dead woman understood that much, surely. She, of all people, would forgive me. That was the meaning of what she said. The servant listened, silent and expressionless. His sword now returned to its sheath. With his left hand, he held its hilt. With his right, he absent-mindedly touched the red, swollen blemish on his cheek. As he listened, something began to stir within him. A new courage, not the kind he had lacked beneath the gate, nor the kind that had driven him to seize the old woman. No, this courage was of an entirely different kind. He no longer hesitated between starving and stealing. In truth, the idea of starving had already vanished from his mind. "So that's how it is," he said at last, mocking her words, his voice low and bitter. Then, the servant took a step forward. Suddenly, he tore his right hand away from his cheek, seized the old woman by the collar, and hissed through his teeth, "Then you won't hate me if I strip you instead. I, too, must steal to live." With a swift motion, he tore the robe from her body. The faded, brown cloth came away easily, in his rough hands. The old woman gasped, then clung desperately to his leg. But he kicked her away, hard, sending her sprawling backward, onto the heap of corpses. The mouth of the ladder was only 5 steps away, clutching the stolen robe beneath his arm. The servant turned, and in an instant, was gone, his footsteps echoing down the wooden stairs, vanishing into the dark, into the depths of the night beneath the Rashomon. For a while, the old woman lay motionless among the dead, as if she, too, had become one of them. Then, slowly, painfully, she stirred, with a low moan, half a whisper, half a sigh. She raised her bare, trembling body from the pile of corpses, guided by the faint, flickering light of the dying fire. She began to crawl toward the top of the ladder. Her breath rasped in the stillness. The wooden floor creaked beneath her hands. At last, she reached the edge, and, with her thin white hair hanging downward, she peered out into the darkness below the gate. Outside, there was nothing, only the black, bottomless night. No one ever knew what became of the servant.